Can you show me how to paint these?
Welcome back to my channel. Today we're taking another look at painting figures, but with a slightly simpler and faster approach than in the last two videos. At the end of last year my girlfriend built her very first scale model, and by now she wants to add a figure to it. Unfortunately, I've never painted black pencil uniforms, so I had to come up with a workflow that's quick and simple, while still looks amazing next to the great model she built. And that's what I did, and that's what I will show you in this video, so let's jump right in. If you already watched my first speed painting video, where I showed you how to get really nice and fast results for normal German uniforms using the quick gen paints, you already know what the first few steps will be. As usual, we're going to start by priming the miniature. Mr. Surveysign Black is my weapon of choice for this figure, but you could use any other primer as well. I often start out with a pre-shading to make the miniature more readable on video, or to use the pre-shading as a base for speed paints. Not this time though. I did a few experiments, and when you paint the black quick-gen paint over a white pre-shading, it has a very noticeable blue undertone and looks a lot like German grey. So you need a lot of layers to get the black result, and by that time the pre-shading effect is almost completely gone. So I started with overbrushing and a bit of dry brushing. The paints I used for that are all available in the AK Interactive Tank Crew uniform set. So if you don't own any of these colors yet, the set is really nice to have for these uniforms. And when at some point you decide that you would rather take the more detailed painting approach with regular acrylics, you already have all the right colors at hand. While you probably already heard about dry brushing, overbrushing is a less known term. It's a lot like dry brushing, but with more paint on your brush. You don't want to completely cover your miniature with the Panzer uniform base paint, but rather get a nice and even coat on all surfaces, except for the deepest shadows. And to remove the excess paint, I lightly dab my brush onto my dry brush palette. Make sure to only touch your model with the brush in a downward motion. If you are concerned that you might slap too much paint onto your model, just use less paint and build the effect up in layers. Make sure that each layer is dry before you add the next one to avoid building up unwanted texture in the paint. I then use dry brushing to build up some highlights. And we're going to work our way through the highlight colors of the Panzer uniform set, starting with a generous dry brush of Basalt Grey, followed by a lighter dry brush with Pale Grey. If you want to show that certain areas of the miniature are a bit more in shadow, do less dry brushing with the Pale Grey on these areas. I used the Pale Grey very sparingly on the lower parts of his pants and on his complete backside to show that those areas receive less light. One important detail about my dry brushing technique: dry brushing can lead to a chalky finish. But there's one simple trick to avoid that. Don't use a dry brush. I like to dip my brush in water and then squeeze out the water from the bristles using my fingers. This way there stays a very small amount of moisture in the bristles that makes sure that your paint won't come out chalky. And a quick mention about the brush used. As always, I use a Da Vinci brush. But cheap makeup brushes also work great for dry brushing. But in my experience, the results that this dry brush delivers are a bit nicer compared to a makeup brush. So let's talk about the speed painting part. I will use my airbrush, but you can also do this with a normal brush with very similar results. And I will tell you how in a moment. I use AK Quick Gen Black, which I mix 50-50 with AK's Ultra Matte Varnish. I then add a few drops of AK's acrylic thinner. In most cases I prefer a really thin mixture for airbrushing, but the nice thing about these quick gen paints is that they are transparent right out of the bottle. This makes it a lot easier to use them for glazing with or without an airbrush. And since they are already transparent, you don't have to worry about your mixture getting too thin, which would make painting a bit more tricky. I then apply a few thin layers over the whole miniature. In this case I think 3 overall layers. As soon as I noticed that the model looked slightly wet, I stopped and let the paint dry to avoid pooling of the paint around details and in the recesses. After I was happy with the overall look, I sprayed a fourth layer only from the bottom up to darken the deepest parts of the shadows a bit more. Let's talk about doing this with a brush. As I said in my first video, I did everything with a brush, which probably is the smarter way when a miniature that you want to paint has multiple different colors. But with a uniform that is mostly black, the airbrush was a bit faster. In my first video, I used the quick medium to thin the paint and to create a glaze. By now I switched out the quick medium for AK Ultra Matte Varnish. And the stuff works equally nice, but with the added benefit that it also already eliminates all the shine of the speed paint, which is a huge plus. I think this looks pretty nice already, and so far the paint job took less than 10 minutes. A lot of you also told me in the comments of the last video that you would like to see how you could enhance a paint job like this. The easiest way is to work a bit more on the shadows. So we're going to explore an advanced painting technique, more glazing, but with acrylics. Glazing can be tricky, but doing it with a dark paint like black makes it a lot easier. I thin down my paint with a lot of water for that. As you can see, at first the paint is way too thin and starts running all over my wet palette. But as soon as I get to a thickness that is just slightly thicker, so the paint does not run all over the place, we achieve the right consistency. And before you start slapping the paint onto your miniature, you can quickly test it on your hand. Paint a few thin lines. The color should be visible, but you want to be able to clearly see your underlying skin. I then used the shadows we created while dry brushing and airbrushing or speed paint as a template to paint in more shadows. Just add 2 or 3 layers of your glaze into these dark shadow areas. This will deepen the shadows and increase the contrast. Glazing is one of these advanced painting techniques that is really powerful. And practicing it on a project and with a color like this is really nice because you've got a lot of headroom for small mistakes. Make sure that the areas where you want to add another layer of glazing are already dry, so you don't reactivate the half-dry paint and cause surface defects that way. And if you want to keep this a bit more simple, just skip the glazing step. Also, this was once again pretty fast. I did a few layers and that took me maybe another 10 minutes. In most cases this step might take a bit longer, but since I'm sometimes a bit impatient, I speed up the drying time by using a hairdryer. While I did the glazing, I made sure to also do another really important thing, black lining. And in this case I actually used black for that. I used the same mixture I used for glazing to paint thin lines around all the details, like the flaps of his pockets, the flap that covers the zipper on the front part of his pants, and also at the edge where uniform jacket and pants meet. Painting thin lines that are a lot darker around details like this makes your miniature more readable instantly. But of course, I don't always use black for that. I vary the color depending on the surface color. While the black line might work on a dark green uniform, it would look rather odd on something like a 10 Africa Corps uniform that would benefit a lot more from something like a darker brown. Getting these lines clean also is, to be honest, something that maybe looks a bit easier on video than it is in reality, but fear not. First of all, if you practice this on a regular basis, you will get better at this pretty fast. And we can also cheat a little. You could switch out the glaze for a wash. Not that ugly overall acrylic wash approach, but something like an enamel pin wash works really well too. I use my normal enamel washes for that and apply them with either a fine regular brush or I use the AK Precision Panel Liner. Using that pin wash approach might require some cleanup work with mineral spirits after application, so it might be a bit slower. And that's why I mostly stick to carefully painting thin lines with acrylic paint. And then we are back to dry brushing. After we just deepened the shadows, it's now the time to push the highlights a bit more. Since we are still working with a uniform that has only one color, dry brushing works again really well for that. On one of my off-camera tries, while I figured out the process for this miniature, I tried dry brushing with the pale gray that we used as a highlight tone before adding the quick gen paint. But since that looked a bit artificial, I switched that out for the Basalt gray, which looked a lot more natural. As before, I used my dry brush palette, and if you don't have one, a piece of kitchen paper also works great. This time I made sure to have very little paint on my brush, to only highlight the edges and to not smear any paint into the dark shadows. Then it was time for a bit of detail painting. And this miniature doesn't really have a lot of details, as usual on tank and uniforms. I once again tried to keep it simple. If you want to enter a competition, you should probably spend a bit more time on this step. But for a miniature that will accompany a tank or aircraft model, this is probably the more reasonable approach. First step was to base coat all the leather parts. Belts, pistol holster and boots were black in most cases, which causes another problem. If every part of his outfit is just black, it will look very boring. But as you can see, there's a clearly noticeable difference in the black we painted for his uniform compared to the black leather parts to make them stand out. And they will also be highlighted to give them a bit more pop in a moment. For his uniform shirt, I decided on a green color to bring in some variation, and I kept it really simple once again. For his shirt, I started out with 2 thin layers of the green version of the field grey uniform base. And then I just quickly edge highlighted the shirt with a bit of AK's grey green. And since I haven't said this in a long time, all the paints I use can be found in the video description below, so there's no need to write down a list while watching the video. So, edge highlighting. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's called edge highlighting because you do it on the edges or because you use the edge of your brush for that. In the end, both things are true. While edge highlighting, we paint a brighter highlight color around the edges to make them stand out and increase contrast. And I like to use the edge of my brush for that. Painting thin and even lines along an edge is again one of these things that are pretty complicated. But using the edge of your brush to gently swipe it over the edge you want to highlight makes it a lot easier. And I'm not only using that to highlight his uniform shirt and even his jacket a bit more, but that's also a great technique to carefully paint the pink and silver edges of his insignia. Pink was the color of the tank units during World War II, and I used silver grey for his shoulder pieces. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about ranks and rank insignia, so I've got no idea how important this guy is. For the medals on his chest, I used AK's oily steel, which is a true metallic paint. Normally I prefer doing details like this with a non-metallic metal approach, but as before, this is just a bit easier. You could also add a small wash to these details, but I didn't bother with that. And of course, the silver grey would also work here if you find metallic paints a bit unnatural. While dry brushing the highlights, I told you that I only used the Basalt grey for that. But at this point I also decided to edge highlight a few more prominent parts of his uniform jacket. And for that I used the pale grey. As I said, it's a bit too much when dry brushed, but carefully applied as an edge highlight in certain spots it looks quite nice, and I like that extra bit of contrast. Next up, leather. I've said this a million times, I love painting leather. And there are many different ways to create really nice textures and different kinds of leather. But we wanted to keep it simple here. However, in case you want to see how to create leather as realistic as possible, check out my last video from 2 weeks ago where I showed you what is possible with a bit more time invested. But first, let's finish this guy. Black leather often is pretty reflective and shiny, so let's create this look as simple as possible by not painting much of the leather at all. First step is to mix in snow blue with the black we used as a base color. Snow blue is one of my go-to paints as a highlight color for black leather, since the light bluish color works great for showing the reflection of the sky. I then used that paint to once again do a bit of edge highlighting on the edges of the belt and this pistol holster, followed by a couple of vertical lines from the top down on his leather belt to create a bit of texture. For his pistol holster, I stippled the same mixture along the top edge to create the reflection on the edge. And to make the holster as well as his boots a bit more interesting, I stippled a thinned down version of this mixture over the surface for a bit of texture. Again, this is the fast and simple approach. If you're looking for something more in-depth, my last video will be the video you want to watch. Last but not least, let's paint his face and hand. And to be honest, this isn't a detailed tutorial about painting this face. I try to avoid making videos that try to be a specific how-to about a single miniature. And about a month ago I released a video that is an in-depth guide about how to paint faces. In that video I used the face of a bust I recently painted to explain the general concepts and theory behind painting faces. And I also showed you the real-time painting footage of me painting a smaller 1/35 scale face. And that video will be a lot more helpful than watching me paint this head. However, for this head I used the same approach that I used in that video. I even used the same color palette. For a brief moment I thought about using just a base coat with an overall wash and then maybe some highlights. But that's just not the way I like to paint. And more importantly, as I stated in the beginning, this video happened because I was looking for a way my girlfriend can paint her miniature, and that will be placed next to her first tank model she built at the end of 2025. And since that thing turned out amazing, I thought it would be a shame to place a miniature next to it that wouldn't match the high standard that she was able to achieve with her first scale model. So, sorry Flo, I know you're going to watch this, you will have to spend a bit more time on the face you're going to paint, but I'm sure you will impress me once again with your paint job. And I'm also sure that the guide I created will help all of you guys out there as well to create awesome faces and skin tones. A link to the face painting guide, the video of Flo building her first model, and the guide on how I mix my skin tones for good measure are all linked down in the video description. But this video isn't over yet, and the paint job isn't finished. Let's do some weathering to add some detail to his pants and to make him fit better together with the tank on a dirt road. I used AK enamel earth effects and stippled them around the lower area of his pants and over his boots. They got about 5 minutes to dry, and then I went in with my brush dipped in odorless mineral spirits to blend them and to remove the excess. I like to keep a paper towel at hand, to soak up any excess paint and thinner from my brush. This is a very quick and easy process to add some dirt, and I like the option to remove the enamel paints if I apply too much. For me it makes the process more controllable compared to using acrylics. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. Would love to hear about your process for painting the uniforms and your experience with speed or contrast paints. If you liked this video, please leave a like, write a comment and subscribe to my channel. If you want to see even more content, check out my Patreon page where you get high quality pictures, workbench updates, ad-free videos, 3D printable STL files, painting guides, and you can get in touch with me via DM. And if you like, you can also get detailed feedback about your models. A huge thank you to all my amazing supporters over on Patreon. You guys help me keep this channel running and I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much. Hope to see you all next time. Take care.